You can have a bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine and or the large intestine, and they can be quite toxic to your nervous system. They can manifest themselves like bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, and outside of the box of digestion, they can manifest themselves as brain fog, body pain syndromes, fibromyalgia, joint pain, anxiety, heart palpitations, rashes, all sorts of things.
Have you ever felt like your body was trying to tell you something, but you weren't quite sure how to listen? Maybe your gut has been whispering or even screaming that something deeper is going on beneath the bloating, the fatigue, and the brain fog. If that's you, today's episode is exactly where you need to be. Welcome to Energy Medicine. I'm Dr. Mary, a chiropractor, medical intuitive, and energy medicine practitioner. And today we're diving into the profound intersection of physiology and intuition. Our guest is Jen Yundt Coles, a functional medicine and SIBO specialist. But truly, her work goes far beyond the gut protocols. Her decade-long journey through food sensitivities, abdominal pain, hormones, burnout, trauma, and perimenopause revealed something that most practitioners overlook. Healing requires energetic sovereignty. It requires slowing down, tuning in, and understanding the gut holds emotional truth we haven't processed yet. Today, we're exploring the emotional roots of digestive dysfunction and why spiritually attuned women are so often dismissed and misdiagnosed, and how reconnecting with the enteric nervous system becomes the missing piece in claiming your power. So let's dive in.
So, as we're talking about that, we'll understand that, again, like I said, it could be in the small intestine or the large intestine. Those are things I'm addressing together in my practice. One of the other ones you mentioned is IMO, which is intestinal methanogen overgrowth. They changed that because basically methanogens aren't considered a bacteria. They're sort of an archaea, and they've been around forever, right? Since the beginning of time. And interestingly, in the context of societies in the world, there are cultures that have naturally high levels of methane, but they're not constipated, so it doesn't get diagnosed as IMO, which is really interesting. That's part of the missing piece there. So you have to have constipation in order to have that positive diagnosis. And the other thing is hydrogen sulfide, which is the third type that we talk about in the SIBO world. And this is actually my specialty within the realm of SIBO. And hydrogen sulfide, as we know, if we're exposed to it in the environment in some way, it can be very toxic and we have to be put in a hyperbaric chamber, right? So we want to be mindful of these dynamics in our intestinal tract. They can cause leaky gut, inflammation, all these downstream things like I mentioned, and be really detrimental to our long-term health and well-being. So this is what I do. I talk about microbiomes and poop and all the things all day. And how those symptoms show up, what kind of information that's actually giving you beyond digestive related. Is there a deeper message coming through, and why that's happening? And so this is kind of part of what I do. I think I may have gone on a tangent there, but I hope I answered your question.
You have, Jen. Thank you. That's a beautiful start to our conversation today. I want to circle back to a couple of things that I think it's really important for the listeners to understand, and that is you're talking about bacterial overgrowth. So there's a certain amount of bacteria that does reside within the small and the large intestine. So you're talking about a pesky little bug that has an overgrowth and disrupts the homeostasis within the gut itself. And I don't think that a lot of people understand that there is a certain level of permeability permeability within the intestinal walls. And so you mentioned that if there is an overgrowth, it can lead to toxicities. I mean, I don't think that people really understand that there is that exchange of bacteria that should be contained within the small and large intestines that can permeate outwards. And then that causes a whole slew of issues. You talked about it, and that number one is inflammation. For those people who have systemic inflammation and they can't quite figure out the core root of it, it's wise, as you are suggesting, to come back into the gut.
Yeah.
So what we really want to hear about, we understand, obviously, the premise of this podcast is to connect and to talk about all things that relate the mind, body, and the spirit. And so your topic is so beautifully suited for this podcast because we're talking about something physiologically happening within the intestinal system that causes a dysregulation in a bigger scope of things. So we're talking about how the gut influences the brain. We're talking about the overall central nervous system regulation. We are also talking about the immune system. We can't just isolate one organ and say, oh, yep, it's just one organ. It's not affecting the rest of the body. So can you dive in a little bit deeper as to how it impacts the entire body, and what are some of the core or deeper issues that people may not be looking at when they're addressing a bacterial overgrowth, either in their small or their large intestines?
Yeah. Wow. What a huge, juicy, expansive question. So I'll try to keep my mind organized. First of all, I wanted to say really quickly that it's important to understand that although the small intestine itself is not necessarily what I'm going to call sterile, it's not really the place where bacteria should be, taking up real estate. So I want to differentiate there, because the large colon is actually where most of your bacteria, your good, happy microbiome and bacteria are existing and fermenting and doing all of their magic. So I just wanted to put that little bit in there just to be clear. But yes, to your point, that inflammation, that wear and tear, dysregulation of the bowels, whether it's constipation and reabsorption of toxins into the bloodstream, or diarrhea, which is causing wear and tear and, dysregulation of the nervous system in itself, which we call the enteric nervous system inside the gut, can cause inflammation and leaky gut. Leaky gut can lead to things like autoimmunity. So your point about the immune system. Your nervous system is getting dysregulated. Remember, if you have what I like to call bullies on the playground inside the intestinal tract, anywhere, large or small, that is sending a signal up through your vagus nerve to your brain that you are not safe. So you are put into a physiological state of fight and flight, right? At that point, you're in survival. Even if you don't feel stressed in your mind, your gut knows what's actually going on, right? So that's the information that we want to kind of plug into as we talk further, energetically, emotionally, and all of that stuff that's connected. I'll also say that I think it's really interesting, and I don't know if you've talked about this on your show, but I have a feeling you have. Well before, a couple of decades ago, before I had children, I studied traditional Chinese medicine before doing what I'm doing now. And as we know, we have these energetic meridians in our body, right, that are kind of associated with different organ systems. And I find this so fascinating, especially as it relates to my personal story with SIBO and chronic illness and all of this, but I see it in my practice a lot, which I hope we'll be able to talk about a little bit more. But in this traditional Chinese medicine theory, our small intestine meridian is intimately connected to the heart meridian. They're like the sisters, right? And we know emotionally the heart can carry things like loss and sadness or longing and things like that. And I find it interesting in my personal story, how I learned about SIBO was after having a heart event. I had broken heart syndrome after years of stress. And so for me, I just feel like that's the light bulb that kind of goes off. We are energetic beings, things are connected, and symptoms kind of just manifest themselves in different ways. The other really cool connection that we have speaking in terms of traditional Chinese medicine, is the lung and the large intestine. So the lung kind of carries emotions like grief and sadness and letting go. And I find it fascinating that the large colon is often where we're holding on to toxins, feeling constipated and unable to let go of things, right? So this is sort of a backdoor conversation that I'll have with many of my clients, because it's not just about the food you're eating or the protocol you're doing or the supplements that you're trying now. It's so much more energetically and emotionally held in the body, and then getting manifested through different types of symptoms. So hopefully maybe I'll get to share a couple of examples of how that shows up in my clientele. But I think it's one of the things that if someone first comes to me, before we even talk about their diet or their supplements or anything like that specifically related to their microbiome, one of the first conversations we're going to be having is, what is the stress situation in your life right now? What is your lifestyle like? Do you have those foundations there, which we can talk about later? But and the other thing is your immune system. For some reason, your immune system is tolerating this simmering infection. And I find that in the conventional medicine approach to addressing dysbiosis in the gut, it's kind of missing these two major things, the immune system and the nervous system. Yeah.
I like that. I like that a lot. And there's something that I want to add to this conversation, because on the show, we spend a lot of time talking about the energy centers known as chakras.
Mm-hmm.
And the enteric nervous system is most intimately connected with the third energy center, which is all about control, individuality, autonomy, sovereignty, all of those emotional themes that come into play within our lives. And one of the things that we've spent, dysregulation is such a common word in today's society that most people have an awareness of what it feels like to be neurologically dysregulated. But what I find interesting is that the intestinal system, you're going to have within the autonomic nervous system, you're going to have sympathetic branches and parasympathetic. And so obviously, if you're sympathetically overdriven within the intestinal system, you're going to have one series of symptoms. If you're parasympathetically driven, you're going to have another set of symptoms. And I want to hear from you as to what your patients show up with, because I think, listeners, what you might hear is that you may hear about the constriction, the impaction, the constipation, and then you may also hear about the looseness of the stool, the diarrhea, and the wateriness. And so this constriction, the vasodilation, the vasoconstriction of the blood flow happening within the intestinal system is coming from the autonomic nervous system. I want to take a moment to offer you something that beautifully supports the conversation that Jen and I have been having, and that is that a chronically dysregulated nervous system connects with gut-related issues. So if you have been feeling stuck or constantly in overwhelm or on alert, I have created something to create more of a sense of calmness and clarity for you. The Ultimate Meditation Guide is a set of 3 powerfully guided meditations, and they're designed to soothe your nervous system and bring you back into balance. These aren't just audio tracks, they're gateways to deeper wisdom, heightened intuition, and profound inner peace. They're completely free. So just visit my website to download them, or simply at the end of the show, scan the QR code and feel free to revisit these meditations as frequently as you need to, and anytime you need support. So now let's get back to the conversation with Jen.
And I'm glad that you brought up the chakras, because this is something that I'll use as a tool in my practice as well. And I might suggest something like, well, I'm kind of getting the sense that perhaps something like a sacral or a root chakra meditation might be helpful for you. Or let's talk about the solar plexus area, right? Because you may be constricting and bracing, or, just being aware of your environment, kind of, pulling yourself in and not taking a deep breath. That having a tight diaphragm in itself is constricting to the entire abdominal cavity. And especially for women, this can affect our pelvic floor as well. And again, that root and sacral chakra, digestion, elimination, our libido, our sexual performance, all of these things are kind of tied into that, right? Interestingly, I find that conversations about hormone shifts is also very important. We know that's innately connected to our nervous system as well. And especially as women, as we're moving into next phase, I know for me, I'm, right smack dab in the middle of perimenopause, right? And experiencing some shifts. And those changes in hormones can also affect our digestion, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be microbial. This is part of the conversation. Part of the conversation as well. A couple of examples I'll just share really quickly is that I had one client who, is a fast-paced CEO, owns her own company, is a busy mom, all the things, trying to wear all the hats. And, we've worked together for months, and we have to sort of keep peeling away the layers of that onion. Like, what else is there? Let's ask some more questions. Let's do some journaling. Let's do some meditation. Let's get quiet so we can hear what our gut is trying to tell us. And for her, it came out that she experienced a trauma earlier in her life. And there was a conversation that she needed to have with her father. And so once she had this awareness, we were able to kind of keep moving through the process of moving energy, addressing emotions that are being trapped and held in her digestive tract. That's where they are turning up for her, right? I've had another client who was a performer in her earlier life and sort of held a certain physical standard for herself of how she looked and how she performed. And when she was in a relationship with someone long term, and as her body started changing, he was kind of reflecting back to her that he didn't like that. And so she felt like she had to keep a certain standard of how she looked and how she spoke and how she acted, and was sort of in this constricted environment in her home every day with this person that she was trying to meet the expectations of. And that was affecting her gut. These are things that you don't normally think about, right? Because you think, oh, it must be because can't talk. Must be because I had dairy today and that's why my stomach hurts. It could be because of the conversation that you have or had not had, right? Or, an interaction with someone that can be stored there. So that's also sort of what I see in my practice. It's an energetic shift, I think, for some people, understanding that once they are aware of those things happening, then you can take action and move through them, process them, and all of that sort of thing, sort of integrate them into who you're trying to be so that you can move on from these sort of symptoms. Another one, just really quickly, is I have another client who is in a long-term relationship with someone. She's a very independent person, likes to go out and do things on her own. And her partner is very controlling, and it's because he's trying to keep her safe. But for her, it feels like she's not feeling seen or heard, and she's having an issue of like burping. So she's like having this throat sort of esophageal stomach sort of chakra energy issue where she's not able to get out what she wants to say to this person, which I find is really interesting. And so energetically and emotionally, that's how I will see things come up in practice. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Dr. Mary?
What's interesting to me is I also have had a client who, when we were doing energetic work, she would belch. As she was releasing and processing whatever it is, discordant, energy which no longer served her within present time, she just keep belching it out. And at the time, it's just like, it doesn't matter how it wants to expel or how it wants to come out, that we just begin to identify the core root of it as it is related to the digestive system.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to share one more thing really quickly. Also, so a lot of that has to do with not letting go or not being able to process or being in a toxic sort of relationship. And sometimes that can manifest itself as things like constipation, for instance, or nausea, bloating. But on the flip side of that, like you mentioned, we're in different lanes of the nervous system, dominance, right? Whether it's sympathetic or parasympathetic. Interestingly, sometimes if we are feeling nervous or anxious about something, we're sending this signal back and forth from our gut microbiome to our brain, including our migrating motor complex, which is the whole muscle contraction system in the intestinal tract that, regulates our bowel movements. If we're getting nervous or anxious or something like that, maybe we have we're giving a presentation, or for me, sometimes it's going on an airplane, right? Whatever it's going to be, like, that's our trigger. That's sending this kind of information like, oh, we're a little bit nervous, we need to evacuate, right? And so some people will end up with urgent diarrhea. That plays into, like, what's the system of the serotonin happening with the migrating motor complex. It's very unique and complicated at times, but all of these things can be at play for someone. So when someone comes to me, whether they have constipation or diarrhea or alternating, these are all part of the pieces that I'm looking at. Yeah.
Okay, so I know that there are plenty of listeners today that have joined us that are leaning into what the wisdom that you are sharing, because not only are you coming from a place of being a clinician and applying the theories, in your practice, but you also you've been through this personally, so you have shared life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so those listeners who are like, okay, I can resonate with what Jen is sharing, they're starting to make some sense to me. If they're looking for practical and tangible steps to start the process to unravel the origin or the deeper roots to whether your whole umbrella of SIBO, how do you encourage people to begin that healing journey? Because it takes a lot of courage.
It does take a lot of courage. And that's really a complex question. So I think at first I'm going to start with some willingness or permission. So a lot of times, as busy go-getters and people who have full lives, we're often deferring to someone else. I think I've already said this, and if I haven't, I'm going to probably say it like 3 more times before we end this call. But we need to stop outsourcing our intuition. So finding quiet time and being able to listen to what our body is telling us. It's not just our gut, it's not just our mind, it's not just our heart. There's a whole interconnected system here that can communicate with us. So just being aware of that and understanding that it's not woo-woo, it's actually how our bodies work, right? Also understanding and honoring the fact that our bodies are electrical, they're emotional, they're spiritual, and they all have different rhythms, and it's not just about biochemistry. So even though people are coming to me because they think I just have this microbial overgrowth, it's so much more than that. So being aware and giving yourself permission and grace to understand that about yourself at first. I think the next thing, like I said earlier, was understanding the role of the nervous system and the immune system up top. So those are big conversations that whoever you're working with, you need to be able to address and be open about. And not holding things in, like really get real with yourself. What is actually going on in my life? It's not just about what's on my plate, but in my home, at my workplace. What is my activity level? What is my sleep looking like? Am I, practicing mindful eating? Am I moving my body? Am I getting sunshine? And checking in with the foundations at first, right? This is kind of what we talk about in functional medicine a lot, right? Just get back to the basics. And then on the deeper level, moving into, after we're talking about biofilms and prokinetics and all the things that go along with SIBO protocols, I'm using things like journaling or meditation, or I'll have my client go try out and take some singing lessons just so they're activating their throat chakra so they can communicate whatever it is that they're holding on to, right? Doing those meditations, like I mentioned, the chakra ones, were, thinking about your meridians, visualizing your intestinal tract and having a conversation with it. I know that sounds really crazy, but that actually works. And I think understanding the role of being able to reset your nervous system, I guess I want to say. So yes, we have busy lives. It's not practical for me to say to someone, oh, you can't be in sympathetic dominance all the time, right? Of course, that's not ideal, but we need to learn how to reset. So of course, we're going to have stressful moments, but how do we reset? So having some of those tools, whether it's we're at our desk and we need to glare out, stare out long distance in the window, that will reset us into a parasympathetic. It's very simple, but something we can do. Or taking a 12-minute walk after we've had our lunch. Instead of sitting at our desk or scrolling on our phone, we're out in nature, getting fresh air. We're stimulating digestion and resetting our nervous system in those 12 minutes of walking. Very simple things. And I would probably say another thing that you may have talked about on your show before are joy activators. When someone has had a long-term chronic simmering illness or digestive issues, which tend to be sort of like a silent, dynamic where people don't see you as walking around with a cast on your arm, so they don't think anything is wrong, right? But you're suffering inside because of these digestive issues. My point is that we lose sight of things that used to bring us joy every day. And we start to feel a little hopeless and alone and isolated. We don't want to go out for dinner with our friends, or, we're feeling like we have to make 2 different meals for our family, and just feeling kind of odd and out of place and alone because our doctors aren't listening to us or hearing us and things like that. So it's really important for us to engage in small things every day, even if it's just for a few seconds, to try to reset ourselves back into that parasympathetic calming mode. Because when we're there, that's the message to our brain that it's safe to rest, digest, and heal, right? So we want to be there more often than not.
That's a beautiful message. And Jen, I just want to say that your first, words of wisdom were inviting us to go back to the basics. And unfortunately, we get so heady and so caught up into our symptoms that we do forget about, oh, wait, how am I dealing with my stress or processing my stress? Am I even aware of it? Am I doing any meditation? Am I mindful of my breath? And that is something that I want to emphasize, is that even though we neurologically can program or condition ourselves into a stress response, we can uncondition ourselves, meaning that the brain is pliable. So if you are doing applied polyvagal exercises, like some of the breathing exercises that you were talking about, if you are doing them consistently enough in a routine, mindful way, you can reprogram yourself so that your response time or your recovery time, if you do go into that sympathetic dominance, that you can quickly bring yourself back into a balanced state or even into a parasympathetic state. And it just takes time, it takes repetition, and it takes a commitment to those exercises that you just outlined for us. So you're very gracious with your wisdom. I thank you for that.
Learning how to reprogram all that crazy nonsense that goes on up there is really important.
That's so true. Thank you for that reminder.
Yeah.
And again, I know that you're sharing so much wisdom from a lived perspective. So in my book, I think that's priceless information along with your clinical background. So I appreciate your functional and integrative approach to health and well-being, period, whether it, goes beyond, just a bacterial overgrowth within the small or the large intestine. So much gratitude for your time today, Jen, for being here on the show, Energy Medicine. And listeners, I just want to say thank you for tuning in. I know that there was an element of curiosity that may have led you to the show today. And I know that you all have a level of willingness in order to heal and transform and to get to the deeper core roots of your issues. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for your willingness to lean into that process. And so until next time, I invite you to merge where energy medicine meets physiology, and please take good care of yourself.